When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Allie Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of the Insatiable podcast, Freedom from the Downward Eating Spiral. With the new year upon us, it's easy to think things will be magically different. And guess what? They can be. If we do things differently, we can start the year with a fresh start, but not necessarily a clean slate. In other words, we still have our emotional selves that we're bringing to the new year. And because this season is about the feminine perspective, or what's missing in our conversations, I'm going to be sharing what's missing in traditional emotional eating approaches, including binging approaches, so that you can blow your expectations for freedom out of the water in today's episode. It can be so much better than anyone's told you. If you've struggled with food for quite some time and you really want a fresh start, you know it's not enough to ask yourself if the food is always worth it. I wanted to do this episode today so you can see why in the moment it actually is worth it, right? I'm also going to reveal the 5-stage anatomy of a downward eating spiral, why traditional emotional eating approaches cause us to eat more over time, and the first step you can take today to put yourself on the right track for a fresh start. Enjoy. Hello, insatiable listeners. Happy New Year. Are we ready to do 2018? I hope so. I know I am. I'm actually recording this 2 weeks before the new year, and I'm already starting to do what I want to do in 2018 now. I don't do resolutions per se, but I definitely have like an orientation that I'm focusing on and a vision that I'm heading towards. And for me, that includes getting back into yoga, like a lot, so that I can stay calm and grounded in my body. I didn't do a great job of that in 2017. I still worked out, but staying grounded in your body is different. And yoga really helps me with that. And I'm also really cutting back on how much news I read and doing it in small, manageable doses versus kind of being plugged in. So those are some personal things I'm working on. And of course, I have some really big plans for Truce with Food and Insatiable this year. I'll be getting a new website in March. And I'm working on a book proposal, and I'll be licensing Truce with Food this year. So I'm really, really hopeful for 2018 in many ways. So that's kind of where I'm at for 2018. I'd love to hear what you guys are focusing on health-wise as well. So today might be one of our most important Insatiable episodes to date. I am going to clearly lay out for you the downward eating spiral that will sabotage the best laid health and healing goals. I'm sure many of you have ambitious health goals, as you should, or I hope they're right size so they don't stress you out. But this, what I'm going to call today, auto eating spiral, will sabotage those goals. And if you don't know what to look for it, you're going to think it's about not having enough willpower, about not having enough discipline, that you love food too much. And so I really want to illuminate and clarify for you today what's actually happening, whether you're overeating and you don't want to be, whether you're binging, or whether you're just having one of those F it moments. And unfortunately, the traditional emotional eating model leaves out 3 components of this auto eating spiral. So I'm going to share it with you today because for a lot of you, I think just hearing this and hearing it mapped out will start to give you some relief and also make sure that you're focusing on the right food goals, which might be more oriented towards this. So I think, the traditional emotional eating model looks like this. I want to give you that first, and then we'll go into the missing components. But the traditional emotional eating model looks like trigger, craving, and then eat. And this is kind of the abstract or process that a lot of experts have outlined. And what they tend to do is encourage you to distract yourself from the craving. I've seen social media recommended by some of the top people in the field. I've seen taking a walk. I've seen journaling. And there's a couple of problems or holes here that can actually make you eat more immediately and in the long run. And I think we can see some of the incompleteness of this model in the results that we had in terms of it seems like we have more information than ever. We have more people focused on this, and yet we still have people, not only do we have girls worrying about their bodies at younger and younger ages, we have boys as well now too. And we also don't have the health results to back this up, that this is complete enough. So part of the problem with this model is, first, many of the things like going on social media often cause new triggers, right? Like comparing yourself to others. I'm not sure I've ever felt better about myself after going on social media. I've certainly felt more informed, I've laughed, or I've maintained how I was currently feeling, but I'm not sure it's ever made me feel more grounded and able to proceed calmly. Second, often if we take a walk or journaling, these are all really helpful things, yet we often don't have the mental framework or the right questions to understand what the actual trigger is. Instead, we often start to just ruminate on, if we're taking a walk. I know when I was trying this 15 years ago, I'd kind of be like, well, how many calories am I burning? I'm still really feeling like I want those cookies. And I knew, even though I was taking the walk, if I ever was able to do it, I knew that I was going to eventually eat the cookies anyways. And then in terms of journaling, I often just journaled more about my food and my weight and how badly I wanted this. Why wasn't I doing this? And it actually became a devolution, if that's a word, where I became so much more self-critical rather than self-aware of what was actually happening that was triggering me. In other words, the craving was the symptom, not the root cause. And because of this self-criticalness, just why couldn't I fix this, grew. The third shortcoming of this approach is it actually doesn't build self-trust with food or around the trigger. Instead, it puts us in a very powerless position around the trigger, right? It's saying that the best that you can do is either avoid the trigger, right, by going on social media to try to distract yourself, or push through the trigger. And so that's frankly putting us in a victim mentality of not even just addressing the trigger itself, right? And as a result of feeling so powerless, like we have no choices, we say that we have feelings like anxiety, depression, stress, and overwhelm. And then we eat to numb out the deep discomfort of actually not having choices or agency. Adults do not like their autonomy being cut off, right? I know I don't. And so because we're not actually dealing with the root cause, you really do have intense physical and emotional discomfort that you can't run away from forever. And again, like I said, this model creates a vicious cycle of being self-critical and not self-aware. And so what happens if you can't take a walk when you're triggered? What happens if you can't journal? What happens if social media isn't working for you, right? These are very almost like Band-Aid solutions. I would say they're like the pharmaceutical industry of a pill, right? Rather than getting to the root cause. And again, sometimes this stuff can work, just like sometimes medicine is really helpful, but it's not really helpful in the long run, and it won't give you true liberation from food. Plus, many times when my clients find me, they've come to me at a point where the trigger itself has become so intense that their eating is completely out of control, or they realize they really need help with this beyond just pushing through, taking walks. And so that is something that if you don't know the components of the auto eating spiral and you don't transform it, you're always going to be at the mercy of when will the other shoe drop, right? Which is a big reason people often overeat or binge, whatever. Any one of those categories where I call we're eating out of alignment with our goals. Because sometimes you want to have some cake. Sometimes you want to have a brownie, and that's fine. I focus, this auto eating spiral is present anytime you're eating out of alignment with what you want to be doing. So traditional emotional eating model, I kind of akin it to whack-a-mole at an arcade, where you're kind of, every time a stress comes up or a trigger comes up, you're just trying to whack it as it's happening, right? And that can be really helpful. But I think we're at an energy crisis, right? We might call it a motivation, a willpower, a discipline crisis, but underneath it all is an energy crisis. We have one globally, right? Are we going to be using unsustainable resources like oil and gas that pollute our environment? Or are we going to start focusing on wind and solar and just not using as much energy, right? Those are more sustainable solutions. And I think we are at a critical time in humanity where we personally have to, so much is coming at us, and we have to become better discerners of what's worth my effort, What do I want to focus on? I can't do it all. And how do I actually get energy back from my efforts? I think part of the problem with this model is you don't really get energy back. You're just kind of keeping the trigger at bay, and you're spending a lot of energy just trying to avoid the craving versus solving the root cause. And again, I want to put an asterisk here. This is what I've experienced in my own life in terms of the shortcoming of this emotional eating model and with the clients who I see. And again, I'm going to see people who this traditional model hasn't worked for. So that's why they're coming to me. So this could very well work for people, this traditional model, but I wouldn't know if it's working for large amounts of people because I see the people who this model is not working for. So I'm just sharing with you that the data I see is biased. Although again, I think when I look at the stats that aren't necessarily getting better on body satisfaction, weight loss, and health, I think overall this model, again, puts us in a victim or powerless mentality, which is never a healthy position to be in. But this model does get it right in that there is a trigger that causes cravings or feeling out of control around eating. So this model is a great start. However, in the decade plus of academic, personal, and real world clients cases, I've been able to map out an auto eating spiral that gets you maximum food freedom and results. And so I want to share that with you today so that you can make sure not only are you asking the right questions for your health and food goals, especially if you want to heal depression, Hashimoto's, or lose weight this year, this auto eating spiral is going to be your ticket. It really, I'd say it's a magic bullet, but I don't like war metaphors. And also it's really challenging work. So it takes effort, but it's going to get you maximum results for your effort. So before I kick off the anatomy of this auto eating spiral, I want to remind you of one of my favorite quotes, which is Albert Einstein said, if he had an hour to save the world, he'd spend more time defining the problem than actually solving it. And if you've ever been to the doctor and they don't really know what's wrong and you just start trying something, you know how important it is to actually have an accurate diagnosis, right? And I feel like in the anti-diet space, in the emotional eating space, in the diet space, in the body acceptance speech area. And again, I'm not familiar with all those areas, but overall, I'm not sure if we've defined the problem accurately. And again, because this episode is about the feminine perspective, what you'll see is the feminine perspective, integrating it requires looking deeply inward, not taking things at face value, and not often believing that what we think we're saying is actually what we're truly saying. Often the thoughts that we have, the self-critical judgment, like I've shared in the food versus exercise willpower episode, those thoughts run rampant when we're feeling really unsafe, both physically and emotionally. So not having this feminine perspective of depth of how important emotional health is really makes us look at a very surface level at what food often is about and weight loss and body image issues. And so what I've seen and what this model rests on is it's not the craving, it's not the food thoughts, it's not the mental gymnastics around food. It's actually feeling powerless over the trigger. Okay. So the trigger is definitely what kicks off the auto eating spiral. And it's also what kicks off the traditional emotional eating model. But it's not even having to be in control of what happens with life. It's about, can I roll with the punches? Can I create and collaborate with what's happening? Because we know we can't control life. We have some control, but really the most beautiful and profound experiences come from when we're able to roll what life unfolds and make the most of it. So you might be asking why no one else is talking about this. And if you've listened to some of the episodes where my clients are sharing that they have this radically different perspective now, it's because, again, of this lack of feminine perspective. We prize the cognitive, the rational, really over the depths. And so as we have more women come to the field, we have more women changing the conversation, or more men who can integrate this more holistic perspective. It's, this isn't about men versus women. It's about qualities of the feminine bringing into things. I think we'll really start to see things change. But this is not, as a result, this process is not 21 days to fix a habit. That's overly simplifying and reducing change, not looking at it from a holistic perspective. And it's also just not about reframing thoughts. Our thoughts actually aren't really accurate about what's going on. And also our feelings, as we'll get into, aren't always accurate either. So that can make things a little challenging. Again, you've got to go deeper. So this auto eating spiral is invisible until you're able to see it. And we spend the entire first month of Truth with Food mapping out each individual person's auto eating spiral. Because once you see it, everything is different. A lot of clients said it's just so relieving to see what's happening and to not think, oh, we don't have to focus on calories. We don't have to focus on, calories in, calories out can be freeing in and of itself. And just so a little plug, Truth with Food is starting for 2018 in February 6th. So if you're interested and this episode really resonates, hey, we can map this all out for you and get it taken care of. So your resolutions, orientations, as I call them for 2019 are really different. You can sign up at alishapiro.com to get all the information about that. So here is the anatomy or the architecture of the auto eating spiral. And then I'm going to go through each component with a little bit more depth, actually using my own story as an example, because I know that the best. And then I'm also going to share you an example of the exponential results when you really transform this auto eating spiral from a client who gave me permission to use her story. I find it so inspiring, and I know you will too. So the first component of this auto eating spiral, again, is the trigger. And in the Truth with Food model methodology, the trigger is an emotion. Specifically, it's an emotion that threatens either your physical or emotional safety. And we don't look at triggers like, I was feeling so stressed when my boss emailed me, right? And it's the email and the boss that are making me feel powerless. Or it's so hard with my friends who can eat whatever they want. Oh my God, poor me, right? And look, if you listen to this episode, Jolie, my sister, and Carlos jokingly call me pobrecita because I love being like pouting about stuff. So I say this because, and I was able to figure this out because it's basically how I thought for so long. So rather than saying, oh my God, this stuff is happening to me, we say, what is this emotion triggering in me? It's not the event itself, it's how this affects me emotionally. And it does have a very real somatic effect on us, and we have to acknowledge what that is. So, and an example of an emotion here, and the one that was really running my life, would be uncertainty. And many people will say that they're feeling anxious, but underneath that anxiousness is there's something that feels unsettled to them. There's something that feels they're unsure of. And what I realized in my own life was anytime things didn't go as planned, I used food to numb out that feeling. And on the surface level, this was when I went off track with my eating, right? I would follow someone else's plan because that eliminated uncertainty for me, at least in the short term, until I couldn't keep it up. Or, exercising, all the experts said you had to do this amount of stretching, this amount of cardio. And if I couldn't keep that up, I would totally sabotage myself because I was like, why can't I do this? I want weight loss so badly. And this is also why I couldn't trust myself over the long run, which actually increased the level of uncertainty in my life. So I was trying to use these coping mechanisms that looked really good on the surface, like being good on a plan or following all these other people's ideas. But I was actually adding to uncertainty in my life, not only with falling off my diet and exercise, but I had increasing health issues. I was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome. My depression was getting worse. My skin started flaring up after I'd gone on Accutane. And it was like these mounting issues. I also really wanted to date at the time, but I was perpetually single. And it was like, will I ever meet anyone? I mean, I was 23 at the time, but it really felt like I was never going to meet anyone, especially because I couldn't lose 30 pounds. And to me, the story I had to minimize uncertainty was you need to lose weight to meet the right person, the type of person you would like, your type. And at this time, I also had increasing questions around if my corporate life was for me. So the emotional trigger that was making me have a downward eating spiral was uncertainty, not just around food, but places in my life. And so basically I was being triggered like several times a day. And so no wonder at nighttime I would just come home and eat because it was, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like I was just being hit with uncertainty so much in my thoughts and also for real in my life. And there are 4 main emotional triggers, uncertainty and anxiety, kind of the same. Those are one that I just shared with you, but there's 4 that are connected with a downward eating spiral. And I'll be sharing those 4 triggers in the complimentary Truth with Food intro that I'm offering this year. So people can get a free taste of the program on January 15th. So again, go to alishapiro.com if you want to learn the other 3 so that you can just start identifying your spiral faster. In this process, clarity is a process, but also a tool. Like I said, one client said that discovering this was relieving in the most uncomfortable way or freeing in the most uncomfortable way. So after our trigger, then we have a story. about the emotion itself. And the story is what the emotion means, which is often what we call feelings. So the story usually comes from our early childhood years. So for me, my story was if I feel uncertain, it means life or death. And the story started from my cancer diagnosis, or at least I thought it was, but that was the big one that I had to work on. And I thought I was over my cancer diagnosis because, the chemo had been done, the radiation complete, 5 years out. And because I didn't have a map at the time, it had been 10 years since I had gone through cancer. And I was like, oh, I'm over it. I'm strong from it. But I didn't know that mentally and emotionally working through things are vastly different processes. And so my body was still holding on to the somatic memory. And to my body, the feeling of uncertainty was so threatening. It was so overwhelming that food was the only thing that could numb out that threat. And even though it wasn't a threat in the present, our feelings are where we're often reacting to the past. So this story is really a story that has reacted in the past. And because I didn't know this story was running my life, it actually grew in the darkness, kind of like mold in a petri dish, because it was never challenged. And without that light, it just took over my life into any areas where I felt insecure. The areas I was confident in, it wasn't active, but it was really, really taking over my life in insecure areas like dating, like my body. Obviously, how to lose weight was a huge insecure area or uncertain area, and increasingly my career. And what's interesting about us reacting to the past today is that a lot of times in emotional eating or the anti-diet movement or, even in therapy, the idea is to feel your feelings. And I think we're on the right track there. What we embrace dissolves. However, many times our feelings actually aren't accurate. So because my story grew, it went from if I feel uncertain, it means life or death. It means to if I feel uncertain, I've failed. And so I felt like a failure with my body, even though I wasn't really trying anything new. I was just like, diets set you up for failure, right? I mean, one thing we know about gaining weight is most people gain weight after doing diets because of the metabolic crashing and because also the self-criticalness that happens when you fall off the wagon. But my feelings weren't accurate. When it came to dating, I wouldn't even date or put myself out there. So I felt like a failure, but I wasn't even trying. And so that's the tricky thing. And I think what we leave out about feel your feelings is sometimes they're so overwhelming because they're not true. We're reacting to the past. So you've got your emotion, you've got your story, and then we have a stress response from that story. So because our story puts us on guard. It makes us very defensive. And this is something that is a shocker to clients. They do not think of themselves as defensive people. And they're very much out in the world succeeding, especially in their careers, especially as parents. They may have doubts about parenting, but trying to do the right thing. They're wonderful in relationships. They're good partners. They're good mothers, daughters, sisters, husbands, right? So they don't think of themselves as being defensive people. Yet they start to realize how much they actually are on guard. And there's 3 different stress responses that we go between and that we also identify in Truths with Food. In my story, when I felt like I might fail, I tried to prevent failure by adapting to what the medical diet or culture said I should do. So this is why I tried so many diets, and I was all in until a big wave of uncertainty would hit me around body, dating, and, my career. But rather than have any agency or independent choice, I thought I had to adapt to experts rather than trusting myself, which only led to me never trusting myself and thinking I had some unique flaw that made me unable to fix my food. And the kicker about this is that this stress response of me adapting actually really benefited me when I was diagnosed with cancer, right? I was only 13. My parents read up on chemotherapy for my type of cancer, Hodgkin's disease. Chemo was super effective. My mom also supplemented with miso soup. She was doing fermented foods and holistic remedies way back in 1992 because she's super cool. She actually wanted to take me to a juice farm in Mexico, and my dad was like, hell no. So, adapting to the medical industry at the time really saved my life. And what my clients start to realize and why they can start to have genuine compassion for themselves is their stress response worked well at the time when they had that original story be created in their childhood. However, one of our favorite sayings in Truth with Food that was made famous by Gloria Steinem and Aaron Brockovich is the truth will set you free, but first it's going to piss you off, right? I didn't choose to have cancer. My clients didn't choose the traumatic events that they've had in their past. And by traumatic events, I'm going to, do a call back to Dr. Blum's episode on the huge link between emotional trauma and autoimmune issues. Is this doesn't have to be cancer. This doesn't have to be something so life-threatening. It's all about what felt threatening to you. A lot of my clients have been bullied. A lot of them lived in a very unstable home because of divorce. A lot of them just really were body fat shamed as children, and that caused the issue of feeling like they didn't belong. Anytime our belonging has felt threatened, that is just as important. That's emotionally at risk, right? If we didn't belong evolutionary wise, we were left for dead. So don't try to diminish your past and what really was there. And we usually didn't have a choice in how we could handle those stresses at the time because we were kids, right? We don't have our full capacity and wisdom and perspective at that time. In fact, especially the younger we are, the more we feel like life is all about us. And it has to be as we're developing identity and ego. But that also makes us feel like, we were singled out in a bad way. Like, why did I get cancer? It used to be so rare. So what I'm just trying to say with this is my stress response of adapting to just kind of what everyone said was really helpful at that time. But as I tried to adapting to a very sick culture that tells you like, oh, you're only worthy of a great relationship if you look a certain way, or you're only, so like I couldn't start dating right until I lost 30 pounds, or life will be easier for you once you do lose weight. I kept avoiding addressing my career because I was adapting to what the culture was telling me. And so what was working stopped working. And I needed a new response, a new way to handle uncertainty. And that was really more collaborative and rolling with the unfolding of not only what my body was and what foods I needed, but who was I at my core from a values perspective, what mattered to me. And once I got those things in line by not continuing to adapt, and adapt is one type of behavior of the three stress response patterns, I was able to really not be a victim anymore of life just happening to me. So the fourth, component is behaviors. So based on your stress response, you will have behaviors that actually make your story come true, right? So these behaviors like finding a new diet or reading more, trying to learn more on holistic health. Like I said, in my own life, I kept adapting and trying new diets. I thought I was being good and cool. And I couldn't see any of this. And again, this is part of why I'm so passionate about this work is I don't want others to have to suffer or take as long as it took me to figure this out, because it's really hard to see on your own, not only because the culture at large isn't talking about it, but the way that we approach behavioral change in this culture is very narrow because we don't have the feminine perspective. So there's as many behaviors as there are people, because again, we all come from unique stories and backgrounds and influences. But some other common behaviors that I see with clients in response to this trigger story stress response that often leaves them exhausted and not having time to prioritize or put themselves to prioritize their health is over preparing for work things like presentations. That's a behavior that actually stems from our stories and stress responses and triggers. Saying yes when they mean no, comparing themselves to other women in their bodies and their careers, or not asking for what food or other things in life they need. And again, their behaviors are a symptom. They're not the issue itself. And these behaviors have usually been going on for decades. So they think this is who I am, when really it's a behavior they have in response to life's triggers. Hence why clients find Truth with Food to be more self-discovery process than anything else. Oh, and I also want to say sometimes the behaviors can be the eating itself. Anytime you find yourself saying, this makes no sense, whether it's a regular habit or if it's a food habit, like I went to the party and I ate before I went, so I wouldn't eat, but now I find myself over drinking or overeating. It's like, okay, what just happened? This auto eating spiral happened, but you couldn't see it, right? You need kind of x-ray vision. No, you do need x-ray vision. So each 4 stages of this auto eating spiral adds tension, which results in a downward eating spiral to release this tension. It's building, 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 building. And each stage can add a different amount of tension depending on the trigger itself, the story surrounding it, the depth of the story being aggravated. For me, when I finally quit dieting and had to find something out, like my whole life was uncertain at that point. It wasn't just one area of my life. And again, that's often when I see clients is this trigger has reached a fever pitch. And it usually is from some transition that's happened in life. Either, I've had a death of a parent. I've had people who feel stuck in their job and they know they want to make a transition. People who are coming out of the workforce to stay at home with their kids for a little bit. Clients often find me in a transitionary phase because their triggers are their one trigger is at a fever pitch and they just feel out of control around food. Or many also are on the verge of a transition. They just don't know it yet. And once we go through the work, they then have the skills and the resilience to make that transition. But what happens is we eat to release this tension, right? So we've heard the phrase, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? So this auto eating spiral can happen in the time it takes to blink your eye and why you all of a sudden feel a lot of tension at a social event and you start thinking about how you can't wait to eat what's in your fridge when you get home at night by yourself. Or it can build all day, right? Like the death by 1,000 paper cuts type of metaphor, where your trigger is actually active all day. And then nighttime is like, oh, I can finally release this. Like that's when we also often hear, I deserve this, right? We think it's that we're treating ourselves for reward, but we're actually relieving real pressure that has built all day. Or it can build all week and why you love to go crazy on the weekends, right? It happens anytime you find yourself binging in private. And what I found with the difference between overeating and active binging is for binging, the story is creating so much tension. It's just a lot more tense of a story and trigger in people's lives than if they're just overeating or having these random times of falling off the wagon or not. It all depends on how much chronic tension is in that auto eating spiral. And everyone's different and everyone's resilience is different and everyone's sense of self is different. So you can see how unique this process is. So that's what I also love discovering about this process is it can help anyone, no matter what your issue is, even including over exercising, over drinking, overeating, over analyzing. So clients start to feel increasing freedom even after a month because the tension starts to reduce just being able to see what's happening. If you've ever been with a good therapist and you start to see, oh, that's why I'm doing that. You know that feeling? That's like when you see all four of these components, it's like, oh, that's what I have to focus on. And wow, if I can change this, not only is my food and health going to get better, but my whole life is going to get so much better. So it takes a good 6 months. This is not traditional behavioral change, which can work if you don't have any emotional baggage with an issue, right? Like if you just want to start, if you're new to food, right, this is why a lot of people can just do a Whole30 and some people can't make it till day 9. If you're like new to nutrition and you have no emotional baggage with it, sure, it's easy to do a plan. You're not dealing with all this other stuff of food as a coping mechanism. But it takes a good 6 months, which is how long the Truth with Food program is, or why I'll only work with private clients for at least 6 months. Because what we want to do is not just stop the bleeding, we actually want to get you well. So we need to master a new story, which gives you a new healthy response and new behaviors. And the cool thing is that this cycle starts to build self-trust and increasing self-awareness, and it gets you back in your body. So you're actually able to be present for what's actually happening. Your feelings become more true. You become more intuitive. You learn to become more collaborative and creative with what's unfolding. We don't pretend that you're never going to be triggered, right? Often my clients will say, I'm coming to you because I need help when real life happens, right? And what they're saying is, I lead a stressful life. I live an intense life. And I need to learn how to better handle it and manage it and lead it rather than it just coming at me so that I don't turn to food. So again, and this process just gets more and more freeing. I had another client the other day who finished out in August, our last round of Truth with Food, because it started in March. And she was saying she just can't believe the compounding effect. How she goes to events now where she used to feel she'd compare herself to other women. And, because that was comparing ourselves to other women is one of the patterns of the stress responses that we identify in Truth with Food. And because she's so much more in her body and she feels more resilient, she doesn't do that anymore. She feels actually open with them rather than feeling like they're competition. She's taking really big risks in her career and it's really playing off. Her clients are noticing that they're doing even better in her line of work. And it's because she's increased her capacity to be with her own feelings. So it's super, super exciting. so she doesn't need to run in and fix them, which fixing people is part of another part of the 3 stress response patterns. And again, all those behaviors, but behavior, trying to fix someone is part of the behavior of our triggers, is one of them for a certain pattern. I hope that didn't confuse people. There's a pattern of a stress response, and then there's the concrete behaviors that happen, like comparing ourselves to others, trying to fix people, etc. All of them are exhausting. I'll just put it that way, and really don't give us any return on our investment. Everyone just feels worse off. So this is what health should be: increasing liberation, increasing freedom, increasing emotional capacity to take risks. That's what I want you to take away more than anything from this episode, is that that's what health is. It's when you feel vibrant, vivacious, and excited for life because you have the tools and skills to collaborate with it. So you might be wondering, like, well, why was I able to stick with a diet for a while or do a rigid eating plan? And I will say that the trigger and the story, which really create the domino effect, they just weren't as active in your life, or you were able to avoid the triggers. However, we can't really do that forever. I would say, especially in today's day and age when everything is changing, we're kind of in one big transition after the other. So that's why when you feel like you've been really able to be quote unquote good with a diet or stick with it, if you look back at that time in your life, you probably weren't very triggered. Probably a lot of things were going your way, or you were actively avoiding those things. But that you can't live like, I mean, you can live like that for sure. Yeah, I'll just leave that there. That's always a choice. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. And over the long haul, and again, it all depends on the person, but usually after about 6 months, you start making choices where you actually avoid the trigger altogether. So often we keep ourselves, you became better to learn from it. So I always say, and again, this is over an 8-year period, but I say entrepreneurship did as much to heal me from cancer as chemo did to cure me, because I lived with chronic uncertainty for 8 years. Okay. I left my corporate job. So, and Carlos and I were combined in school together. We kind of joke we had financial PTSD for 8 years as someone who doesn't like debt and going to grad school at the same time at Penn, which is a fortune, and paying for it myself and blah, blah, blah. But the point was I had financial insecurity for 8 years. I was following this path that had never been done before. And so I was like, is this going to work? Like, you always have that question as a business, but taking that educational risk was big. You know, Carlos and I, then he got a second fellowship for a master's degree, moved to Iowa. So then I had like a really stable force in my life, and then he left for 2 years. But the point is that for basically 8 years, I've been bombarded with uncertainty, but it used to mean stop to me. It used to mean eat and numb out. And over time, it now means, what can I learn from this? When something doesn't go right with my business, or if Carlos and I have a fight, which we're great communicators, but like all relationships that are healthy, you have constructive dialogue. I no longer think I've failed or I need to shut down. It's, wait, what did I learn here? And what was my part in this? And what do I need here? So over the long term, it just makes you feel really badass. We call, in Intrusive Food, we call this the boss mindset, and we abbreviate it bosses. I don't want to swear. So the cumulative effect is my nervous system can just handle a lot more. And so I've been able to heal very deeply with some issues that I thought were just how my body was, even at this stage, which is super cool from a physical standpoint, but I just feel more and more emotionally free. And if you listen to other client interviews, you'll realize that they started to discover things about themselves and being able to take more risks and really discovering who they are and their path. Like I said, that my educational path is very unique. I think it'll become increasingly less unique, but at the time, 10 years ago, or should I say 9 years ago, I didn't start grad school until 9 years ago. It was very different, but you start to trust your intuition and your path more and more, and aligning with your truth is the path to healing. You are the medicine many times. It doesn't mean you don't need support or tools or techniques, but the base of our medicine needs to be us aligned with our truth, starting with the foods we need, the sleep we need, the exercise we need, but then the emotional choices we make. It creates a huge ripple effect. And like I said, I didn't say this, but what I want to share now is what surprised me is I've become masterful at guiding clients through this process is the deep healing that defies medical textbooks. And I've kind of learned that medicine doesn't really fully incorporate the feminine perspective. And so kind of learned, certain fun things and seeing how there's limitations of what we can expect. But I want to give you an example today of a client of just super cool healing that's happened in 5 months from her freeing herself from this auto eating spiral. And by freeing, I don't mean that she doesn't still have to transform this, because she's at the point now where she's actively thinking, what do I want from life now that I have more space and time? And I'm realizing a lot of what I thought I wanted was just stress and coping mechanisms. What does she want to do? So let me back up. She's a client, someone I've been working with, like I said, for 5 months. And she's in that 28 to 30-year-old age bracket, which is a huge transition time for people, And she'd been struggling with her weight for about 20 years. And when she came to me, she was like, the nighttime seems to be really challenging for me. And it seems like if I could crack that nut, I could work on other things as well. And what she was realizing was that her auto eating spiral built all day. And at night, she kind of had time to, unwind, right? We use that phrase because we're tense from this auto eating spiral, which has really nothing to do with food, is she'd finally have time to think about all that she did think about, from like reviewing her day and questioning all the ways she handled things. Like, did she do the right thing? Could this have been better? Is that person mad? What's going to happen now? And this really being in her head, because she wasn't in her body. Most of my clients kind of feel like they're this like bobblehead, right? Or just like a floating head detached from their body. It was creating real physical anxiety in her. So in 5 short months, she's gotten to the point, like I said, where she's increasingly preventing this auto eating spiral altogether. I always say if we think of things seasonally, the first couple months are like winter. We're composting this really hard ground, these fixed ways of viewing ourselves and food, and really composting. There's definitely lots of cozy moments and, the bright lights look beautiful in the darkness, but it's a composting time. And so now we're in this spring phase where she's learning to work with her triggers to learn to take bigger risks. And so she's getting more and more idea of new preferences and new ways that she wants to orient her life. And it was interesting. We were in a session the other day and she kept saying things are getting so much better. She's now worried the other shoe will drop. Her story actually happened to be around uncertainty too. She had a different story. It wasn't connected to failure, but it was something else. And when we reviewed the day and the week, the truth was her old definition of the shoe dropping had dropped many times. She just no longer feels the emotional, physical anxiety or the emotional discomfort about it. When her big boss emails her, she no longer thinks like, what's wrong? Or when a family member's call has been missed, she doesn't think like, oh no, something's wrong. She's like, oh, I have to get back to them, right? So imagine the energy she's saving during the day, the emotional resilience she's getting just from not freaking out so much. And she was freaking out in part because her nervous system was jacked up. It's really hard to calm down when your nervous system is jacked up. And by transforming her auto eating spiral, she's totally calming her nervous system down, right? She's not in fight or flight on a chronic low grade response all day. So we're healing her physiology by healing her emotions. She feels more in control of her schedule. She's not overanalyzing things as much. And so what are the results? What are the physical and emotional results besides just genuinely feeling better? Well, she had really stubborn sleep issues that she's always struggled with. They are starting to improve drastically. And the cool thing is she had all these like muscle crampings she would wake up with, and everyone was telling her, do magnesium or, drink more water. And she's found that they're gone. For right now, they may come back in a little bit, but they're increasingly improving because again, her body is not as tightly wound during the day. We connected together that she was put on birth control in her teenage years. And she was like, you're the only person who asked me why I was put on birth control. But we realized it was actually causing a lot of issues with her, not only from a weight perspective, but some other health issues. So she was able to get off birth control and it's really clearing out her system. And she's feeling her emotions better now. And she actually is embracing that. She feels more in tune with herself. And so these health changes are dramatic. I mean, to get off the pill, to be sleeping better. She finds that with eating, she's making the right choice for her body about 80% of the time with no formal plan, just knowing being in better alignment with what works for her. She finds that these quote unquote little things that we think are little, like being able to ask, order what she needs in front of everyone without thinking like, what are they thinking of me because I'm getting extra protein or too much fat? All of that has gone away because we've changed her auto eating spiral. She's also able to have really challenging conversations. They're becoming second nature. They're not feeling so challenging anymore. It doesn't mean that they're not discomfort, but the feeling of uncertainty feels so much smaller now. It's almost like when we first start working together, that feeling feels like glass, overwhelming, like you're glass in your foot, like, oh my God, that hurts so much, or it's so overwhelming. And now it just kind of feels like a little pebble, and you're like, oh, I can remove the pebble. And so from a weight perspective, she started to lose weight naturally without the old gearing up. In fact, she got on the scale the other day because she's like, I know this is working and I can feel this is going to work. However, I wanted to make sure I wasn't gaining weight. And she was pleasantly surprised that she started to lose weight. And part of that is from going off the birth control. And part of that is, again, reducing her nervous system so she's not eating as much, out of alignment. And so weight loss is often the side effect of this process. Not always, but often. And she also has healthy angry about our medical and diet industries, which I fully approve of, because they each have their own flavor of crazy, and she wants to help change things in her way. And I share this with you because with incentive like this, she doesn't need me to quote unquote hold her accountable. She needs me to support her when she feels stuck again, or she can't see certain things in that auto eating spiral. But her body wants to feel great. She wants to feel great. It's just giving her the right tools and the right clarity and the right vision, so she can do that for herself. Okay. And I want to be clear again, though, like I said, she's in this like spring phase. She's still going to be triggered. She's still going to have, quote unquote setbacks, but she knows how to learn from them now, or she knows how to get the support to learn from them. And I think that's what is really exciting. Before I get to the next part of this, is I just want to put an asterisk for if you're a coach listening to this, or a healthcare professional listening to this, or if you are a consumer of coaching and wellness issues. I often feel really upset and disturbed when I hear other, and I'm going to put coaches in quotes because I feel like everyone's a coach these days. Everyone's an expert. And maybe that's just because that's the industry I'm in, so I see it all the time. But I often hear people saying to clients, you don't want this bad enough. If you want to stay stuck in your story for more years and lose out, that's your problem. Or call me when you're ready. And I think a lot of coaches and experts don't know what they don't know. And so it's not malicious. They think they're being motivated. They think they're pushing someone outside of their comfort zone. However, in the food versus exercise willpower episode, I got into how clearly it is when it comes to emotional stuff that we actually have to stay with the discomfort, not push through it. And that discomfort is there because it's protective mechanism. So if you are a consumer of health and wellness coaching products and you hear someone with that mentality, I'd really caution you to go at your own pace or to not participate if it doesn't feel comfortable. A lot of this stuff is traumatic. Why we don't do what we know we should is a protective mechanism until we have the right tools, the right empathy and compassionate person to lead us out of the self-destruction we're doing on our own. And I just get really nervous when I hear people think that they have to not go at their own pace. My process is always client-led. Clients lead the pace because I really believe the psyche, which is part of the body, lets us know what issues to focus on at that time. To give you an example, I had to focus on my cancer experience. But after that, I discovered that being bullied was causing me a lot of issues. I was no longer eating because of them, but it was causing my own emotional issues and stress that I needed to work through. But I couldn't see that. And I don't think my psyche was ready to see that until after I went through healing a couple rounds of my uncertainty failure story. So if you are someone who's participating with a coach like that, I'd really hope you'll find someone who has compassion and empathy. And if you're a healthcare practitioner or a coach, really respect your client's brilliance. And the way that you can push them is through asking better questions so that they can own the process more. And again, this is part of why I'll be licensing Truths with Food in fall of 2018, so that we can have really compassionate, supportive, and challenging tools to get people to really get better results than I think the current models offer us. So I just wanted to put that there. We are in a time of huge educational transition, and the traditional healthcare model works if you're in a very acute distress. But for the rest of us who are kind of in this messy muddle where we're definitely not feeling as great as we want, the tools and the education aren't always sufficient. And so I don't blame the coaches themselves for this. If you're listening and a coach and a healthcare practitioner, I hope you'll be mindful of this at the same time. So to liberate ourselves from the auto eating spiral, we create a news story. So that same feeling doesn't feel so overwhelming and threatening. It feels like a little pebble in your foot, and one that you can actually say, hey, what do I want to do with this pebble? Do I want to skip stones? I don't know. Do people still do that? I did that in college. In water. Do I want to sand it down? Do I want to paint it? Rather than just thinking it's a nuanced problem, which when we create this news story, we create a new response, and then we have healthy behaviors that are rewarding, that lead to rewarding outcomes, and our self-trust grows and grows. So I think that's the big thing for this year, or for this episode, is you can be free of this. And the results are so much more liberating and hopeful than I think our culture has currently offered. And if you're interested in doing this in a very efficient and elegant and supportive way, I hope you'll join us for Truth with Food 2018, which starts February 6th. And I'll be offering a free intro where you'll learn the 4 triggers, the 4 truth triggers to the auto eating spiral, and giving you a little bit more detail and client stories. So I hope today was helpful. Oh yeah, and you can sign up at alishapiro.com, and the free Truth with Food intro will be starting January 15th. So I hope today provided you a little relief idea of how to focus your health goals for 2018 if weight loss and healing are your goals. And I forgot to say with my client too, she's tapering off her anxiety meds as well, which is exciting because of that work. But if this resonates with you and you feel like, hey, she's describing what I've kind of been feeling, I hope you have more clarity around that and you can start to deconstruct the process for yourself, or join us, like I said, in Truth with Food. It's a great time and I would love to have you. We have a lot of insatiable listeners now. So if you like these kind of conversations, you're going to love the people, the women who join. If you found this show helpful, I'd love if you could pass it on to a friend or family member. And always, if you can leave a review. Thank you. So many of you left reviews while we were off. I appreciate that so much. And let's keep them coming so we can change the conversation to be more inclusive of the feminine perspective. Have a good one. Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at alishapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health and our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.